Hi everybody, hope you're doing marvellously well. Wait, I haven't asked you how to pronounce your last name, but I'm assuming it's Roget.
Where?
Roget?
Roget.
So, Wilbert Roget. How are you?
I'm great, thanks.
We are at GameSoundCon, and I love the idea of this. This is a really, really smart idea to bring like all kinds of audio professionals together that don't understand, game audio, and sort of connect them with the sort of interesting technology that's going. And you're the keynote speaker.
Yeah, they've decided to do that this year for some reason.
Well, it's probably got to do with the fact that your resume is pretty impressive. It was just we did a quick highlight reel of Mortal Kombat, which of course is a massively successful game, Call of Duty, the World War II version, which our son plays, and Lara Croft. I mean, those are huge, huge games.
Yeah, I feel very lucky that I've been able to work on all these franchises and interact with the fan bases and all that.
I mean, there's literally a million questions. I mean, how you end up being a composer on these incredibly successful games. I'd love to know, basically where you started from and how you got into it, because I'm sure everybody watching this is going to want to know that, because they want to know what the opportunities are and how they were afforded to you and, everything that you did to get to it, where you are now.
Sure, yeah. Actually kind of similar to you, I started with classical performance. I was playing the piano since I was maybe 4 years old. And
wow.
What's kind of weird about it is that there were two aspects to my early piano studies that were kind of unusual. Number one is that I'd always been an improviser. And I remember I would have some piece that my piano teacher would send me home with, and instead of actually learning the piece, I would make something up that kind of sounded like it and like use maybe some of the similar techniques that I would later have to learn for that piece, and that's how I would study it. Not realizing that what I was doing was model composition, like kind of on the fly. But the other piece of it was that once I got into high school, the Sony PlayStation had come out, and I found the game Final Fantasy VII. Such a brilliant score, and it was so inviting and such a great sound, and it almost seemed to encourage you to, it sounded like it was saying, hey, listen to this music, it's so beautiful, it's so great, and you can do it too. It's so easy, just try it. It was so inviting.
Do you remember who was the composer?
Nobuo Uematsu does the Final Fantasy series. It's a Japanese role-playing game. And I remember that I started to do a lot of transcription of game music at the time. This was long before MP3s or streaming were even thought of. And so if you wanted to hear music from your favorite game, you had to find the MIDI file that some basement-dwelling loser had spent hours and hours transcribing note for note. And I was one of those basement-dwelling losers that had done all this. And we had a great community.
We know the nerds have taken over the world. It's okay.
Now, sure.
The geeks and the nerds have taken over the world. That's a fact.
Now, sure. Maybe not so much back then, but we were very happy with our craft of transcription and figuring out a way to get it to sound as close to the source as possible through general MIDI, which, as you know, it's not like modern production where it's like, oh, I need this to sound a little different. Let's add an EQ, compressor, whatever. No, you had to figure out with that limited 128 sounds, how are you going to get it to sound like what you want? And what I didn't realize was that I was learning orchestration through that. Because when you go to the orchestra, you only have, 30 instruments or whatever. And if you want a sound that's not inherent to that, you can't just say, oh, you throw a compressor on you can't do that because it's a live performance. Instead, you have to figure out, okay, well, how do I combine timbres or use different techniques or rebalancing, using the octaves, things like that. And that's how you would get the new sound that you want. And I was training in that this whole time without even realizing it. And
what kind of equipment? I'm picturing you in your basement or in your parents' house.
Cassette tape to record the thing from the game, and then just probably some free audio editor like Goldwave on PC, and just really old school stuff. And I remember MIDIsoft Studio was my first sequencer. And then after that, Microsoft Direct Music Producer. It was also free and clearly not meant for this purpose, but it, for some reason, had an amazing sequencer. And later on, eventually, Cakewalk Sonar.
Great.
And many, many years later, REAPER, which is what I'm using nowadays.
Ah, another REAPER user. We just put out a video yesterday on REAPER.
Oh,
I'm not a REAPER
yeah.
user, but I hear about it so often.
Yeah.
And this is exciting to see, somebody at your level, because you, frankly, are at the highest level when it comes to game composition, using REAPER.
Yeah, REAPER. I've been using that exclusively since 2009, 10, something like that.
I'm going to pause you on the REAPER, and we'll come back to that, because I do want to know a little bit more about your journey.
By the way, Final Fantasy VII, my favorite game, dude.
Oh yeah. Oh my goodness.
That game is beautiful.
It's so great.
It's
and
amazing.
then you dive a little deeper, and then you see like, wow, Final Fantasy VI, that was great too. Wait, 5 was great too. 4? Like, how does he? It's all the same guy in Japan. It's amazing.
Let's get back to your journey.
Sure.
So there you are. You're a kid. You're trying to figure out the composition. You love this music. I've never met anybody who came from that background talking about it. We've talked to a couple of guys that are really amazing. Most of them come up as like shredding guitar players, and they get into a lot of that kind of stuff. And then they learn how to like program and edit, and MIDI sort of comes that way. But I've never heard anybody fall in love with the game music to inspire them to do games.
Yeah, we're in an interesting time now where not just composers, but also a lot of developers, they grew up with video games. Whereas in the older generations, that wasn't necessarily the case. Maybe they wanted to be architects, and then that sort of led its way into game design for obvious reasons, like, having that sort of structure was
I've got another 10 years on you, so the games I had were awful. It was like
Really?
Pong when I was super little, and then that crossover like late 80s, it was still pretty bad. Obviously when PlayStation came out, it changed everything.
Oh, sure, yeah.
But yeah, you grew up with like quality games.
Pretty much, yeah. And this was a time when games were starting to embrace the storytelling and cinematic in a way that wasn't possible before, because they'd moved from the cartridge-based systems where you had maybe 8 megabytes total for the entire game. Now you have CD. And so you have however much that was, 400, 600 megabytes, whatever it was. And now they can, and so now they can have these full motion video sequences. You can have recorded music all you want. You can record an orchestra. You can record a band and put that in the game. And it was one of those cases, kind of like the entirety of the 1980s, where we have this new technology and nobody knows how to use it. So they're all just dialing it to 11 and just going to town. And that freedom just made for so many creative projects and so many interesting ways of putting together games and game scores. So for me, it was absolutely fascinating. I mean, I honestly didn't listen to that much other than just one game score after another for most of high school. And of course, all my classmates were listening to like gangster rap and things that weren't really that interesting to me. Mm-hmm. So this was kind of my whole world for a while.
Is this 90s?
Yeah, I mean, I graduated high school in like 2001. So
oh, wow.
Whenever that was. Yeah.
So it was like rap and grunge.
Pretty much, yeah. Yeah, exactly, yeah. What's funny, actually, is that very recently, like last 4 or 5 years, I finally discovered Seattle grunge music. I love it so much. I love Soundgarden and...
Soundgarden in particular, amazing.
They influenced quite a bit the Call of Duty score that I wrote.
Really?
Just in the way that Soundgarden especially works, and Nirvana, works with harmony. It's not like they're using chords and going from one chord to another, but especially on Super Unknown, you can tell that it's like, here's a bass note and here's a melody note. And they almost kind of have this counterpoint where all the harmonies are implied by just the spacing. So you listen to a piece like Limo Wreck, Soundgarden there, and you can hear like, you could fill in those notes if you wanted to on a piano, but it wouldn't have that same like magnetism as just the very minimal like, nope, here's this note, here's that one. They're a tritone apart, but that implies so much and it has this great tension and whatnot. And I kind of tried to replicate that with, I know this is the mother of all tangents, but I tried to
No, this is a fantastic tangent.
With Call of Duty's harmonic language.
Oh, no, I love Chris Cornell's writing. I love, that whole period with of course, Nevermind, Bleach, obviously before that, Bleach with Nirvana, but Super Unknown. The way that, it was a simplistic way of doing it. You would take major chords and then move them in minor third intervals. So they didn't have that constraints of what a diatonic scale could be. And I loved that. But then you go back to the earliest rock and roll, everything always had that. Blues, everything came from irreverence, came from a not understanding this is the way it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
And grunge for me was one of the last times that music has done that. Now we're back to, with pop music, everything's 6/4-1/5 or 1/5-6/4.
Yeah. You know what's kind of funny now that you mention it, and I never thought of it this way, but the way that harmony works for a guitarist is so different from how it works from a keyboardist. Because we have, as a keyboardist myself, we have this sort of like one-to-one, here's the map of the piano. And sure, our hands kind of fit into like a sort of claw that we're chording around with, but essentially it's like you have a note, you pick a note and you play it, and then that's it. Whereas with a guitar, you have a hand shape, and it's much easier to just move your hand shape around, just transpose to go here, there, wherever. Or maybe you have one string that you'll just keep open while you're moving your hand shape to somewhere else. And that comes up with
Very
all
Chris
these...
Cornell, yeah.
Yeah, and that comes up with all of these interesting harmonies that you really never would have thought of if you were just playing, you know...
Yeah, they're playing like a minor 11 chord. But really what they're doing is they're holding a chord and just bringing it up X number of frets.
Exactly, yeah.
But it's creating something a lot more complex than necessarily they understand.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is a beauty in guitar playing that I love, is that you can create beautiful sounding music with a limited amount of knowledge. Obviously, you can do that with piano as well, but yes, you're right, a middle C is a middle C. On a guitar, the middle C is here, 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 here.
Yeah.
And it creates all kinds of interest.
It's a living puzzle box that you're constantly trying to,
Yeah, beautiful. All right, so you're listening to all this music, but mainly game music. Was there a period now of playing in bands and performing before you even got into composition, or what was the sort of journey?
I mean, well, I was composing music as well. Like while I was doing the transcriptions, I was also writing original music. And what was great about this forum that we had was that we had space for both of them. So we had like composers who were also writing in that very like 1990s Japanese RPG style, our own compositions and stuff. And we had like a nice critique kind of community there. And what I also found on the internet at the time was sort of like a very small and almost pre-nascent indie game community. So I actually got to work on several games. I mean, unfortunately, pretty much none of them actually got finished, because this is long before we had middleware or marketplaces. But I did have the experience of writing entire soundtracks, start to finish, and developing my sounds for it, coming up with a sound palette, which, by the way, back then, it was real time. Like you had your MIDI files, but then you had your sound files, and each MIDI file would trigger sound files, and you had like a RAM budget, and had to think about all those things. But the experience of doing that is also what led me later on to be a sample developer, because that's basically what we were doing. And so that kind of helped me to have that mindset that was needed for when I founded Impact Soundworks, maybe like 10 years afterwards.
Amazing.
But yeah, I did those indie projects throughout high school and college. Eventually, after college, I joined the Game Audio Network Guild. I got to be member like number 43 or something, like really, really old, long before it got huge. But yeah, after a while, doing more projects, meeting the right people and really befriending them over many years, I went to my first GDC in 2006, and fast forward about 2 years, and eventually I got hired as a music assistant at LucasArts, and kind of rose in the ranks there, and eventually had an opportunity to write original music for them on Star Wars: The Old Republic, and then that led to more things, and my rank increased to be more of like a music, like kind of assistant music supervisor, and taking on my own projects and whatnot. And then when LucasArts went down, I kind of parlayed that into a freelance career, and then the rest kind of happened. Yeah.
That's a heck of a resume.
Oh, thank you.
How did you get the job at LucasArts?
I had befriended a guy named Damien Kastbauer on one of those aforementioned indie projects. The project never finished, unfortunately, but we really hit it off. He was our sound designer. And he told me, hey, come to this GDC thing. And I'd never heard of it, but I was like, all right, well, I'll print some business cards, check it out. It's very expensive, but it seems like the right move. And I went and befriended a lot of people. The Game Audio Network Guild had like a student and apprentice contest kind of thing. It was like a composition based on a theme of some kind. I think it was like military shooter or something. I wrote a piece for it, and I ended up winning that, and I got to meet a lot of really cool people in the industry.
There's a little piece there that shouldn't gloss over. you did some work, you won a competition to get noticed as well, because I think it's important as well.
Yeah.
Because obviously, yes, you're building relationships as well.
True, yeah,
but you're also working for it as well.
I mean, I would always say, like, there's really no reason why you can't do whatever you want.
Yeah.
You fall into like a vortex if you make any excuse whatsoever. Even if you have no budget or you have not the access to the biggest orchestra or whatever, if you start making that compromise, then it kind of very quickly falls apart. Well, to answer your original question, so it was maybe 2005 or something that I'd met Damien, but he ended up being a technical sound designer that was contracting for LucasArts. And then when they had an opening about late 2007 for a music assistant, he recommended me to it, and I interviewed, and they ended up hiring me for that one. So that's kind of how it all went on. Yeah.
So you go freelance after that.
Yeah.
What's your story from being a freelancer to where you are now?
Well, while I was still at Lucas, I tried to make as many connections as I could, and I was still taking on work sort of somewhat surreptitiously, and just trying to still stay active and not turn it into like a comfortable 9-to-5 kind of thing.
Was it 9 to 5? What sort of hours did you have to work at Lucas?
It vastly depends. I mean, there was one point where I was working on Monkey Island 2 Special Edition, Star Wars The Old Republic, and Star Wars Force Unleashed 2, all at the same time. So I would have to do one in the morning, one at the afternoon and evening, and the other like past midnight, and then just come in the next day and just repeat the process.
So sort of 18-hour days?
Pretty much, yeah, at least. So there were times like that where it was crazy. Usually it wasn't that bad, but in my position, because I was dealing with not only the internal games, but also the externally developed titles, sometimes I would just be there for crazy hours, just having to deal with all that. Just part of the nature of the beast, I guess.
That's good. I mention this because I do want people to know the amount of work that you have to put in.
You have to love the work. That's actually all it comes down to. Yeah. If you don't love, I mean like the excruciating minutia of the work. Obviously, there's some stuff that's kind of a bummer. You wish you couldn't, you could bypass that. But if you don't love the details of it, you should maybe consider something else. It's not really worth it for like the money or the success or whatever. You just have to love the craft. I love comedy. Comedy is one of my favorite art forms, and Jerry Seinfeld, I think, is one of the masters of comedy. And every interview he does, he explains, I don't need money at all. I'm Jerry Seinfeld. He still does it because he loves the craft. That's why he'll spend 10 months on a single joke. He doesn't type anything on a computer. It's all freehand written on paper, developing jokes, revising to the syllable, to the very letter, to make sure that everything is very perfectly constructed. And that's been a great motivator, I think, for how I like to approach it. I didn't mention this with the LucasArts thing, but I was not really supposed to write a single note of original music while I was there, which is a fact that was told to me multiple times in like the interview while I was working there, and they were like, this is not a composition position. And I was totally fine with that because, again, there were aspects of it that I still really loved, and I loved the idea of working on these AAA titles. And the technology, there was a huge tech push, and I've always been fascinated by games like graphical technology and whatnot. So I was happy to be there. But one day, I think it was like a year and change into when I was working there, I kind of overheard the music supervisor and the audio director talking about how, because the deadlines were slipping and some other politics things were happening, they needed to hire a 5th composer for Star Wars The Old Republic, because there was just no way to get things finished in time for the orchestra recording. So I kind of overheard that, and basically that night I went home, they didn't tell me anything about the game, so I just had to sort of imagine, what should this game sound like? I wrote a piece, kind of forced them to listen to it the next day, and kind of explained, look, I'm already here, you don't have to pay me anything, and just give me a shot, maybe. And they did. And I ended up, at first they said, well, we'll let you write like 20 minutes of maybe some ambient music or something. I was like, deal, yeah, awesome. And that actually grew to over an hour, I think, when I could inherit cues from other composers who were too busy. And yeah, it ended up being the first time I wrote for a full like live orchestra and choir. We recorded in Bratislava as well as at the Skywalker Ranch. It was just such an incredible experience. And it was all because I'd accidentally overheard them talking about getting another composer for this project.
But you went back that night and wrote something to play them.
Yeah, well, actually, I mean, once my workday was over, literally on the bus ride home is when I'd sketch it out on paper and, got home, orchestrated it, brought it in, and that was like, here, I can do this,
But you proved that you could do it.
Pretty much, yeah.
That's amazing. Okay, so you're going freelance now. You left Lucas.
Yeah.
Or that's over now.
Well, I knew it would be very difficult. Like, I actually honestly told myself, I'm pretty sure that of the 200 odd people who worked there, I would be the very last one to land on my feet. And I was right. But I had a friend who was also our audio producer at LucasArts. She was hired as the audio producer for Kabam, which is like a mobile game company. And she hired me on some of their games, which is really awesome. It was a lot of like fantasy type scores that I got to write for that, which is so rare to be able to write in that style, and I really loved it. And another friend that I had befriended while I was at LucasArts, kind of like a local San Francisco audio director, he was starting up a game called, Lara Croft and the Temple of Osiris. And long story short, he hit me up to do both composition and music tech direction. Like designing the interactive music system and implementing the music. And so, I got hired for that. And after that there's also Dead Island 2, which I got off a website, which is sort of odd. You'd never see that, but they just had a listing on their company website, like, we're looking for a gameplay engineer, FX artist, music composer, this. But it was still a contract, freelance position, external, like anything, but for some reason it was on their website.
That's amazing.
Just weird coincidence that they actually did that. But and then after that, the way Call of Duty happened was one of my coworkers from LucasArts, he had worked at Sledgehammer, and I was giving a lecture at GDC that year, so I was sort of setting up meetings and stuff, and I realized, let's hit this guy up. So I had them introduce me. And it turned out that that audio director had played Lara Croft in the Temple of Osiris, and he already liked the music, and he was like, let's talk. One thing kind of led to another, and we had similar ideas on how to mix music with sound design without each of them stepping on each other's toes. And they ended up hiring me several months later. I didn't actually even have to demo, believe it or not. Like, they were just like, we liked some of the Star Wars music that you had done at LucasArts, and we like your kind of perspective towards looking at the full mix rather than just focusing entirely on the music, instead looking at the big picture. So let's do it. And
I suppose me probably naively saying this, but I think having Star Wars on your resume anyway, shape or form, is not a bad thing.
You'd be surprised that it doesn't really translate. It doesn't usually translate very well to any other not Star Wars game. Which is a fact that I learned the hard way when it took me so long to get anywhere after LucasArts shut down. But in this case, it was because the music, Star Wars is such an epic story usually, right? It's usually the Jedi, the Sith, and these huge romantic space opera kind of thing. But the score I did was for a game where there were no Jedi or Sith. It was all about the foot soldiers. It's kind of like what Rogue One did many years later, where it was like, all right, we have two sides, and neither of them is the villain. Instead, they are soldiers who want to bring order to the galaxy. They want to fight for peace. And then you have the rebels they just want to live in peace away from that. Neither of them is the bad guy. And so I just painted them as such. And I think there was something about that aggressive humanizing of these characters that they really liked, because that's what they were doing with Call of Duty World War II. It's not a game about superheroes. We have a tendency to look back at these historical battles and imagine these heroic figures, but it's a game about people, and young people too. They were 19, 20, whatever. Very vulnerable, very human. And they wanted a sound for that. And once they, I guess, heard this Star Wars thing that I did, they figured, you know what, I think that's the direction to go on. So that's
I love that explanation. You mentioned earlier that you use REAPER.
Yeah.
How did you end up with REAPER? What were you initially on? And then how did you arrive there?
Yeah, it's funny. It actually was because of the LucasArts stuff. Like everyone else at LucasArts was in Logic and Pro Tools. They were a very Macintosh-centric studio. And I've always been a PC guy myself, and I used Cakewalk Sonar for years and years. But I was doing a lot of music editing, music cutting, and Logic, it's terrible for it. Absolutely the worst, especially back then. I don't know if they've improved or what. And Pro Tools, I couldn't get it to work. You know how Pro Tools is, so finicky and just all sorts of terrible stuff happening. And so I'm looking up, like, what can I do? I got work to do. I can't just be sitting here. And I saw this REAPER thing, which at the time I was like, wait, the people who made Winamp have a DAW now? All right, let's check it out. And it turns out they based their UI on Sony Vegas, which is a video editing program that I was already familiar with. So I figured, I'll give it a shot. It's got a free download, so I'll just check it out and stuff. And it worked incredibly well. It was so good for music editing in particular, and any kind of audio editing and mixing. So at first I just used it for that, but later on I eventually realized that it's incredibly CPU efficient, and its mixing capabilities are so far beyond what Sonar could do. So over the course of maybe a year, I gradually transitioned from composing in Sonar to composing in REAPER. And I've been REAPER 100% ever since.
How long has that been, like, over 10 years?
Ish, yeah, I guess about 10 years now. Yeah.
Do you get involved in in forums and helping?
I try to, like whenever I do a score, I try to post on the REAPER forum and talk about some of the, like we have a Facebook group, and I try to talk about some of the features that I developed for it or some of the techniques. Like, for example, I did Call of Duty all in one big project file. Mm-hmm. It's about 5 hours long. The reason being that REAPER has a really robust regioning system. Mm-hmm. And so from the perspective of, say, the orchestrator or the mix engineers, it seems like it's separate files. But for me, it's all one big project, so I can easily keep track of different versions of pieces. I can get started on a new piece very quickly. I can take sound design or recording or any other element from one piece and very quickly put it into another. It's just really slick for scores that are going to be recorded live anyway, or that have a consistent instrumentation. For Mortal Kombat, it was so varied that it didn't make sense to do it that way. But for both Lara Croft and Call of Duty, it was just all one big project file. It runs on my tablet. If you want to see afterwards, I can show you. That's like my thing I like to show off. Be like, hey, check this out.
No, let's see it now on camera.
Sure, yeah. So here's the Call of Duty project file. This is kind of where I put all the stems, but the actual content is, its whole thing here. And see, it's quite lengthy. Wow. But what's nice about REAPER is that I can go to any of these regions I want. So it's like if there's a particular piece I wanted to work on, I can just find it here, just search for it in the thing, and then here I have this. It just makes it very convenient and easy to kind of get around.
What string sounds are you using? Those are great.
This here is probably East-West Hollywood. That's it's kind of what even now I pretty much only use that for strings unless it's like some special technique stuff that doesn't exist in that library. How
often are you given budgets to go in and record live strings?
It depends on the game. I mean, for Call of Duty, we recorded in Nashville. Fantastic sounding group there. We also recorded Nashville for Destiny 2 Forsaken. And some other, like Facebook has a sort of music library kind of thing that they're doing now that I participated in a little bit. So they recorded there as well.
Amazing.
And amazing group there. And for Mortal Kombat, I sort of, we only really had the budget to record the main theme. So I did that with Dynamedian. So they did this like remote recording session in Budapest, Hungary. Right. Which was great, and then in the end, I ended up kind of doing the Hans Zimmer thing where you're layering the live with exactly, to kind of get the larger than life sound. Sure. But it always depends on the game. Sometimes you'd be surprised that like a smaller game that does have a budget or a larger game that doesn't, and you just kind of have to make sure that
I know
no matter what.
Unbelievably expensive.
Oh yeah, it's easily 6 figures. So
we were talking. Do you remember, Eric? We were talking to Junkie XL, and he has this photo of him standing surrounded by an orchestra for, I don't remember which movie it was. I think it was Superman. And he's like, this recording day, it was a couple of days, 2 or 3 days, $400,000.
yeah.
And it's just like, it's not something you want to do twice. So I can't.
That's actually, I mean, $400K for a Hollywood film is not even that.
Isn't?
I've heard much more astronomical.
Insane.
That some people just have that kind of money.
But the games, I mean, some games, if they hit, they can make movies look small time.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I've read numbers that are just astronomically. The profitability on a game can be insane.
Yeah, I mean, the Call of Duty I worked on, I think it made like, what, $500 million in like a month. Some crazy nonsense like that. And I'm like, wow, I'm glad I didn't know about that while I was working on the game.
Yeah, the pressure.
Because that would have been, I mean, the pressure was already unbearable, but that would have just been like, all right, well.
How did you deal with the pressure? I mean, you just
go to bed crying every night. You know? No, because think about it, like, I'm some kid from Philadelphia, whereas all the other Call of Duty games were scored by either gigantic, huge name Hollywood people or people who were like their right-hand person, and they were in that Hollywood system, every single Call of Duty game. Whereas, as you know, I'm a video game person. That's kind of where my life has always been. And I never had a connection to Hollywood necessarily.
I like that narrative, the kid from Philadelphia.
It's honest. I mean,
I love it.
it's just like, who is this guy? One of my favorite. I know you shouldn't look at YouTube comments because that's the quickest way to go insane. But there was a long time where everyone thought that Hans Zimmer had done the score, because they, for a variety of reasons, Sledgehammer didn't really want to announce who wrote the score at the time they usually announce that, so they wanted to wait for quite a while, because it's such a big game. And the music gets out because they did a beta, and everyone, for some reason, assumed like, oh, it's Hans Zimmer, oh man, and I saw this one comment thread after the game did release, and I was announced, Hans Zimmer really outdid himself this time, it's so great, whatever. And then someone commented like, no, it's actually Will Roget, and then their reply is like, oh, well, just imagine if Hans Zimmer did it. I mean, this this unknown composer, nobody's heard of him, but Hans Zimmer did Gladiator and this and that, and it's like, all right, cool, I guess. But to be fair, I love Hans Zimmer's music, so I'm not trying to,
No,
whatever.
I don't think you say that.
Yeah, but it was just really funny comment thread to see how quickly
that's what people do.
Had changed. It was like, all right,
But it was the same music they loved before they knew who did it. So you're the keynote speaker here. Just pretty fantastic all around. Fantastic for them because they have you and you can share.
Yeah, and I'm very grateful to get to come. I've only been to GameSoundCon once before, so I'm very happy that Brian allowed me to do this time. It's really cool.
I mean, I think it seems really well attended. My gut is next year is going to be really, really well attended because there's so many of us that come from rock and roll and pop and EDM and rap and R&B that are probably looking at this as how do we get into this world.
Sure, yeah.
And this is a great opportunity for people to come and mix and socialize and hear.
Absolutely, and what's great about, in my opinion, about GameSoundCon is that since it's in Los Angeles, which is such an apex for every form of entertainment, even things you wouldn't assume, people can just come over, and it's much easier to kind of socialize here and get to know people than it would be at somewhere like the Game Development Conference, where it's up in San Francisco, which is quite a drive or a plane ride, and it's so huge that it's really hard to navigate and kind of find your way. Here, everyone speaks the same language. We're all audio folks, different aspects of audio. But we all have something to say, something to learn from each other, and I really appreciate that about the vibe of GameSoundCon.
What are you working on next? Are you allowed to say?
I can talk about one of them. It's a game called Anew, The Distant Light, which I can show you some stuff on here too, but it's a 2.5D Metroidvania taking place on an alien moon. The Earth has been pretty much destroyed, and you're not really told what your mission is. You just wake up on this alien moon in your spacesuit, and there's another empty space pod, and you have to figure out, well, who is this other person who flew over there with me? And who am I? Because you were born on the spaceship, it's 27 light years away. And how do I do whatever it is that my mission is? And also, what is my mission? And you learn more and more about the alien world and its history, and about the Earth and its history, and who you are and what your mission is as the game progresses. But it does so with no dialogue. It's all environmental storytelling, and I use like musical themes to sort of suggest things as well. And we have these really cool sort of narrative spaces where it's trying to tell that story, but within the context of this Metroidvania sort of run and gun, and also with a lot of vehicles type of gameplay. What I love about it is, well, two things. One, it's so gorgeous. The art director is just a visual genius, but it's also a game made by 2 people, like total, which is, when you see it, it's just hard to believe that, you know, just 2 people can accomplish that much. And also, when I started the project, they had also played Lara Croft in the Temple of Osiris, and that's why they came to me. Normally you start a project and you get reference music, and it's maybe from a film or sometimes another game. It was all 20th century art music. It was all Bartók, Ratovada, John Adams, and all these very unique 20th century composers. And so that's sort of what I tried to bring into this. I mean, I mixed that with some more kind of Debussy influence, as well as 1960s Moog synth type sounds.
I like the idea of a small team, though. I mean, look at like Minecraft was one guy.
Yeah, Notch, whatever, the Swedish guy, yeah.
So I think there's this. I also think there's a sort of a beauty, because there is things that we love, and you've been involved in these kind of huge projects where there's a little bit of a consortium, is one way of putting it, but almost like a focus group mentality of making stuff. Yeah. I'm sure in certain situations that's of benefit, but then in other situations it maybe loses the edginess and you know. So I think the idea of what's the game called you're working on?
It's called Anew, The Distant Light.
Right. Just so having 2 minds is actually probably keeps it edgy and.
Yeah, there's a lot of weird. I mean, his direction really was right for us, the stuff that you would never get away with on any other game. I love that. That's
and
you'll hear some of that. It's sort of, it can be very intense kind of stuff, yeah.
Well, we're talking to Brian earlier about how Naris is starting to recognize game music in the Grammys and stuff. I mean, that's, you know, there's very few things that, well, opening a huge can of worms. There's very few things like, you know, with the Grammys now that we're like, wow, this is life-changing like they used to be. I think the last thing maybe 4 or 5 years ago was Kendrick Lamar when he came out. When he came out, you know, in a straitjacket, and I remember thinking, this is something Bowie would have done 30 years ago. You know, there's something like actually thought-provoking. So it's interesting that game music, and now you're talking about this here specifically, it can push the boundaries.
Yeah.
So, you know, everything, at least in our world, feels a little safe. So it's exciting to see that it isn't necessarily all that way. Can I see, speaking of which, can I hear it?
Yeah,
when you said Bartók, it immediately got me interested.
A very old trailer, so this isn't necessarily...
Oh, I love this. That's how it looks?
Yeah.
Oh, I love it. It all looks like it's painted in gouache. It's kind of got this. But then it's got this defender lateral kind of thing going on. Yeah.
But it's actually open world.
Yeah.
But 2D open world.
With 2D open world, yeah. Which is great, because you look at Minecraft, when I first saw Minecraft, and our son first started playing it, I was like, is this 1985 technology? You know?
Yeah.
You don't know when this is going to be released?
We honestly don't exactly know. We have a target, but I don't know if we're trying to. I don't know if the target is announced, but.
Well, the thing I can say is the music just works.
Oh, thank you.
You know what I mean? Everything it's super cinematic, like really cinematic, amazing work.
Yeah, the idea is
Expansive. Huge.
Yeah. It's sort of to have a sound that is weird and doesn't really immediately make sense to listeners, but that has like an internal logic.
Right.
Because one of the things you find out very soon is that there is an alien civilization already there, but it operates on a completely different level than anything that humans would recognize. So yeah, I wanted the music to sort of reflect that, be like very weird, and it's like, how does this make sense? But it does on some level. That's
I got the bar talk, that kind of
yeah.
like that's great.
Thank you very
Great
much.
work. So thanks ever so much for your time.
Yes,
I
thank
really
you.
appreciate it. Your resume is fantastic. There'll be a blog post as well, which you can click to, and you can read Will's resume there. And please have a bunch of comments and questions below. Are you into writing, composing, game music yourself? If you are, please let us know. And just once again, I really appreciate it.
Thanks.